All right, let's continue. Chapter 25 and 26, page 220. George fell back through the door and landed on the floor with a heavy thump. This time, the journey back from outer space to Eric's library had seemed to suck all the breath out of him, and he had to lie on the floor for a few seconds, panting, before he could get up. When he staggered to his feet, he hoped he would see Eric hurtling through the door behind him, but instead, all he saw was the outline of the door, which had become faint and wavy. It seemed to be fading into nothing. He yelled out, "Eric!" but got no reply. A millisecond later, the door vanished entirely. "Cosmos!" shouted George, undoing his spacesuit helmet. "Quick, Cosmos! We have to get—" But as he turned around to face the mighty computer, he had his second great shock. Where Cosmos should have been, there was just a spaghetti tangle of colored wires in an empty space. Looking wildly around the room, George saw that the library door was ajar. He ran through it and into the hallway to find the front door wide open and the cold night air blowing in. With no time to take off his spacesuit, he dashed into the street where he could make out the shapes of 4 boys running along the road. One of them was carrying a bulky backpack with a few wires sticking out of the top of it. George hurried after them as fast as he could in his heavy suit. As he stumbled along, familiar voices drifted back to him on the wind. "Be careful with that!" George heard Ringo shout. "Beep, beep," came a noise from the backpack. "Unlawful action! Unauthorized command!" "When is it going to shut up?" shouted Tank, who was carrying the backpack. "How come it can speak even if it isn't plugged in?" "Help! Help!" came the mechanical voice from the backpack. "I am being kidnapped. I am the world's most amazing computer. You cannot do this to me. Alarm! Alarm!" "It'll run out of batteries soon," said Whippet. "Unhand me, you villains," said the voice inside the backpack. "This bouncing around is bad for my circuits." "I'm not carrying it any farther," said Tank, coming to a sudden halt. George immediately stopped in his tracks. "Someone else can take over," he heard Tank say. "All right," said Ringo in a menacing voice. "Give it to me. Listen up, you little computer. You will shut up for the rest of the journey, or I will take you to pieces bit by bit until you are just a pile of microchips." "Eek," said the computer. "Do you understand?" said Ringo in fierce tones. "Of course I understand," said the computer snootily. "I am Cosmos, the world's most amazing computer. I am programmed to understand concepts so complex that your brain would explode if you were even to—" "I said," snarled Ringo, opening the top of the backpack and speaking down into it, "shut up. Which part of those 2 words don't you get, you moron?" "I am a peaceful computer," replied Cosmos in a small voice. "I am not used to threats or violence." "Then be quiet," replied Ringo, "and we won't threaten you." "Where are you taking me?" whispered Cosmos. "To your new home," said Ringo, shouldering the backpack. "Come on, gang, let's get there." The boys set off at a run once more. George staggered after them as fast as he could, but he was unable to keep up. After a few more minutes, he lost them in the foggy, dark night. There was no point in running any farther. He couldn't tell which way they had gone. But even so, he felt sure he knew who had asked Ringo and his friends to break in and steal Cosmos. And knowing that was the first step to finding the supercomputer again. As Ringo and the boys ran off into the night, George turned and walked back to Eric's house, where the front door was still wide open. He went in and headed straight for Eric's library. Eric had told him to look for the book. But which book? The library was full of books that stretched from floor to ceiling on the shelves. George picked out a large, heavy volume and looked at the cover. "Euclidean Quantum Gravity," it said on the front. He flicked through the pages. He tried to read a little. "Because the retarded time coordinate goes to infinity on the event horizon, the surfaces of constant phase of the solution will pile up near the event horizon." It was hopeless. He had no idea what any of it meant. He tried another book, this one called Unified String Theories. He read a line from it. The equation for a conformal. His brain hurt as he tried to make out what it meant. In the end, he decided it meant he hadn't found the right book. He carried on looking around the library. "Find the book," Eric had said. "Find my new book." George stood in the middle of the library and thought very hard. With no Cosmos, no Eric, and no Annie, It seemed terribly empty in that house. The only link George had to them now was a pink spacesuit, some tangled wires, and these huge piles of science books. Suddenly, he missed them all so terribly, he felt a sort of pain in his heart. He realized that if he didn't do something, he might never see any of them again. Cosmos had been stolen, Eric was fighting with a black hole, and Annie would certainly never want to speak to him again if she thought George had anything to do with her dad getting lost forever in outer space. He had to think of something. He concentrated very hard. He thought of Eric and tried to imagine him with his new book in his hand, to picture the front cover so that he could remember what the book had been called. Where would he have put it? Suddenly, George knew. He ran into the kitchen and looked next to the teapot. Sure enough, there, covered in tea stains and rings with hot mugs had been rested on top of it, was a brand new book called Black Holes, which George now realized was actually written by Eric himself. There was a sticker on it that read, in what must have been Annie's handwriting, Freddie the Pig's favorite book, with a little cartoon drawing of Freddie next to the words. That's it, thought George. This must be the new book Eric was so happy to find when Freddie stormed through the house. This must be the one. There was just one more thing he needed from Eric's house. It was another book, a larger one with lots and lots of pages. He grabbed it from beside the telephone, stripped off Annie's pink spacesuit, and shoving the two books in his school bag, rushed back into his own house, closing Eric's front door carefully behind him as he went. I'm on page 227. That evening, George scarfed down his supper very quickly, and then he shot upstairs to his room, claiming he had lots of homework to do. First of all, he got the very big book out of his book bag. On the front, it said Telephone Directory. As his parents didn't have a phone, George had thought it was unlikely they would have a phone book, which was why he had to borrow Eric's. He searched through the alphabetical listings under R. Using his finger to go down the long column of names, he came to Reaper, Dr. G, 42 Forest Way. George knew Forest Way. It was the road that led out of town to the woods where his parents took him in autumn to gather mushrooms and blackberries. He figured he couldn't go there tonight. It was too late, and his parents would never let him out at this time. And anyway, he still had work to do with the Black Holes book. First thing in the morning, though, he'd go to Dr. Reaper's house on his way to school. By then, he hoped he would have a plan. He put down the phone book and got Eric's Black Holes book out of his bag, desperately hoping it would hold the information he needed to rescue Eric. Every time he thought about Eric, which was about once every 3 minutes, he felt awful. He imagined him alone and frightened in outer space, not knowing how to get back, with a black hole trying to drag him into its dark belly. George opened the book and read the first sentence of page 1. We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars, he read. It was a quote from the famous Irish writer Oscar Wilde. George felt it was written specially for him. He was indeed in the gutter, and he knew for sure that some people were looking at the stars. So he kept on reading. But that first sentence was the only one he understood. Next, he read, in 1916, Carl Schwarzschild found the first ever analytic black hole solution to Einstein's equation. Arrgh, he groaned to himself. The book was in a foreign language again. Why had Eric told him to look for this book? He didn't understand it at all. And Eric had written it. Yet every time Eric had told him about science, he had made it sound so simple, so easy to understand. George felt his eyes tearing up. He failed them, Cosmos, Annie, and Eric. He lay down on his bed with the book in his hand, and hot tears ran down his cheeks. There was a knock at the door, and his mom came in. Georgie, she said, you look very pale, honey. Are you feeling ill? No, Mom, he said sadly. I'm just finding my homework really difficult. Well, I'm not surprised. His mom had picked up the Black Holes book, which had fallen out of George's hand and onto the floor. She looked through it. It's a very difficult textbook for professional researchers. Honestly, I'm going to write to that school and tell them this is ridiculous. As she spoke, a few pages fluttered out of the back of the book. Oh, dear, said George's mom, collecting them up. I'm dropping your notes. They're not mine, George was about to say when he stopped himself. At the top of one of the pages, George read, My difficult book made simple for Annie and George. Thanks, Mom, he said, quickly grabbing the pages from her. I think you just found the part I needed. I'll be fine now. Are you sure? Said his mom, looking very surprised. Yes, Mom. George nodded furiously. Mom, you're a star. Thank you. A star? Said his mom, smiling. That's a nice thing to say, George. No, really, said George earnestly, thinking of Eric telling him that they were all children of the stars. You are. And don't you work too hard, my little star, George's mom told him, kissing him on the forehead. George was smiling now, so she went off downstairs to put another batch of lentil cakes in the oven, feeling a lot happier about him. As soon as his mom left the room, George jumped off his bed and gathered together all the bits of paper that had fallen out of the back of the black hole's book. They were covered in spidery handwriting and little doodles, and numbered pages 1 to 7. He started to read. So chapter 26 is the copy of the book that George is reading. So it's called My Difficult Book Made Simple for Annie and George, version 3. It began. And then it talks about what you need to know about black holes. And the entire chapter is talking about black holes and what we need to know about them. So, section 1, what is a black hole? A black hole is a region where gravity is so strong that any light that tries to escape gets dragged back. Because nothing can travel faster than light, everything else will get dragged back too. So you can fall into a black hole and never get out again. A black hole has always been thought of as the ultimate prison from which there's no escape. Falling into a black hole is like falling over Niagara Falls. There's no way of getting back the same way you came. The edge of a black hole is called the horizon. It's like the edge of the waterfall. If you're above the edge, you can get away if you paddle fast enough. But once you pass the edge, you are doomed. As more things fall into the black hole, it gets bigger and the horizon moves further out. It's like feeding a pig. The more you feed it, the larger it gets. Section 2, how is a black hole made? To make a black hole, you need to squash a very large amount of matter into a very small space. Then the pull of gravity will be so strong that light will be dragged back, unable to escape. One way black holes are formed is when the stars have burned up their fuel, explode like giant hydrogen bombs called supernovas. The explosion will drive off the outer layers of the star in a great expanding shell of gas, and it will push the central regions inward. If the star is more than a few times the size of our sun, a black hole will form. Much larger black holes are formed inside clusters and in the center of galaxies. These regions will contain black holes and neutron stars, as well as ordinary stars. Collisions between black holes and other objects will produce a growing black hole that swallows anything that comes too near to it. Our own galaxy, the Milky Way, has at its center a black hole that's several million times the mass of our sun. I would like you guys to read pages 234 and 235 about the neutron star. Section 3, how can you see a black hole? The answer is you can't, because no light can get out of a black hole. It's like looking for a black cat in the black cellar. All you can do to detect a black hole is by its way of gravity pulls on other things. We see stars that are orbiting something we can't see, but we know can only be a black hole. We also see disks of gas and dust rotating around a central object that we can't see, but that we know can only be a black hole. Section 4, falling into a black hole. You can fall into a black hole just as you can fall into the sun. If you fall in feet first, your feet will be nearer to the black hole than your head, and it will be pulled harder by the gravity of the black hole. So you will be stretched out lengthwise and squashed in sideways. This stretching and squeezing is weaker the bigger the black hole is. If you fall into the black hole made by a star only a few times the size of our sun, you will be torn apart and made into spaghetti before you even reach the black hole. But if you fall into a much bigger black hole, you will pass the horizon, the edge of the black hole, and the point of no return, without noticing anything particular. However, someone watching you fall in from a distance will never see you cross the horizon because gravity warps time and space near a black hole. To them, you will appear to slow down as you approach the horizon and get dimmer and dimmer. You get dimmer because the light you send out takes longer and longer to get away from the black hole if you cross the horizon at 11 o'clock, according to your wristwatch. Someone looking at you would see the watch slow down and never quite reach 11 o'clock. It's crazy. Section 5, getting out of a black hole. This might be the most important section. People used to think nothing could ever get out of a black hole. After all, that's why they're called black holes. Anything that fell into a black hole was thought to be lost and gone forever. Black holes would last until the end of time. They were eternal prisons from which there was no hope of escape. But then it was discovered that this picture wasn't quite right. Tiny fluctuations in space and time meant that black holes couldn't be perfect traps they once were. Instead, they were slowly leaked particles in the form of a Hawking radiation. The rate of leakage is slower the bigger the black hole is. The Hawking radiation would cause black holes to gradually evaporate. The rate of evaporation will be very slow at first, but it will speed up as the black hole gets smaller. Eventually, after billions and billions of years, the black hole will disappear. So black holes aren't eternal prisons after all. But what about their prisoners? The things that make the black hole or that fell in later, they will be recycled into energy and particles. But if you examine what comes out of the black hole very carefully, you can reconstruct what is inside. So, the memory of what falls into the black hole is not lost forever, just for a very long time. You can get out of a black hole. And that's where we're going to stop today. I know you guys want to keep going because it's very exciting. See you soon.